and welcome to this tutorial on exporting models from Blender to Space Engineers. In this tutorial we will have a look at exporting models in FBX format and then compiling them to fit the requirements of the Keen Software House's engine. We will also have a look at exporting the models in DDS format and which compressions are necessary. Obviously you will need Blender. I will use the latest version, so I will use the vanilla version without any additional plugins so everyone can follow. You will also need Gimp. The latest version is 2.8.10, and you will additionally need to download the DDS plugin, as Gimp is in its original form not able to view DDS files. But I will also add the links to the description so you can just click them. Lastly, you will obviously also need the game itself. The game comes with a tools folder that contains this WMW Builder, but as soon as this step appears in our tutorial, I will tell you how to find it and how to use the builder itself. So let's get started. As I've said, I will use the vanilla version of Blender. I've just re-downloaded version 2.71, so you have the same starting screen as me if you re-download that. Let me first off get rid of all the stuff we won't need for this tutorial. We won't need the camera, so we can just move it to another layer, as we won't render anything out from the game or game engine of Blender or Blender itself. We won't need a light source, at least for the purpose of this tutorial, as I won't view the textures on the cube in real time with this light source. I will maybe set the shaded to shadeless to see if it worked, but how the GLSL render mode in Blender works is not part of this tutorial. Maybe I'll make a tutorial on creating assets later, and we will discuss that in that tutorial. So we can get rid of that as well. The only thing I've changed from the vanilla version is this screencast keys here, so you can follow on the bottom left which keys I press and get a good idea on which steps I take. So the first thing I have to say is this is not a basic Blender tutorial, so if you're new to Blender and have no idea on how to navigate or create models, then this is certainly the wrong tutorial for you. I won't use any pre-made model for exporting right now. I will just use the basic cube, and I guess it's easy for you to follow then, as you can just reproduce this from the tutorial and later on move to more complex models, as the process of exporting will stay exactly the same no matter what model you will use. So I'll go to isometric mode just for easier navigation, and I will adjust the scale of this cube to the scale of the system in Space Engineers. This cube has the dimensions of 2, 2, 2. Space Engineers large cubes use the dimensions of 2.5, 2.5, 2.5. So if we now apply the scale with Ctrl A, we will exactly have a block of the size that Space Engineers uses. So after we've done that, keeping in mind that this is only a cube model which we want to export, even if you have a more complex model, let's say the monkey, you can now add in a cube with these dimensions to see what kind of scale you like. If you create something that's quite wide, you can just duplicate or scale this up by 3 on the x-axis, for example, and now you will see what a model looks like in Space Engineers size-wise if it's 3 times as large on the width as a normal cube. So you can already kind of scale it so it fits perfectly into Space Engineers. Another thing for exporting later is that it needs to be centered in the middle. Not only the origin point should be the center of the model itself, but also the model should stay at the 0, 0, 0 of the 3D window. So if you export it, let's say like this, then the box that lets you place stuff in Space Engineers will be here, but the model will be here and you can float through the model. So it's very important to always get at the origin of these coordinates 0, 0, 0. Another important step is to assign a material and a texture to the model before you export it. So this cube already has its material, as it's the default cube. We will rename that for easier copying later, so it's not as long as if we copy the whole thing. Now, as I've already said, you also need to apply the texture already. Therefore, we need to go into the UV editor. Important to note is that you need to do this after unwrapping and in edit mode. As we don't have any specific texture for this cube, we will just unwrap it as it is. So we will have overlapping faces and can just use one square texture to fit to all faces of this cube. After you've unwrapped your model and have something like this for the cube right now, or let's say a real unwrap, you would create your diffuse texture, your specular texture, etc., and test that out already in Blender before exporting it. Once you've got your diffuse texture, you can go into the UV image editor, go into edit mode in the 3D view, and click on Open. Now you will find your saved diffuse texture, maybe in PNG format, whatever suits you best. A lot of people use Targa. I just used this, dummy PNG for the purpose of this tutorial. So we've applied this diffuse texture now to this cube. Keep in mind that the name of this diffuse texture will also show up in the FBX, and we need to copy that later. So if you keep the name in mind, it's easier for you to find the right place. But we will also come to that when talking about compiling the model. So we can take a quick look, go into textured mode, and it's already... it's the original version of Blender, so it's not in GLSO mode. But that's fine. We can quickly change that. And look at it shadeless. And assign our texture. We've just used. And after assigning it, and if you're happy with how it works and if it fits your needs, and maybe you added a high poly ambient occlusion bake or whatever, you can just start with the exporting. So this is what we need to do in Blender. Just to repeat, set it to the origin point, mind the scale of the object, so create a cube with a 2.5, 2.5, 2.5 unit size, and always check if you have a different model, check if it fits this scale, and apply the texture in the UV editor and as a texture on the model itself. If you've followed these steps, you can now click on File, Export, Autodesk FBX. Now search for a folder where you can save your file and all your textures. You will need those later on, and it's easier if you have them all in the save folder and just can copy them. As you can see, I've already tested this out and created a dummy cube.fbx, so we'll just override that. Important settings for this now are use the ASCII, the ASCII of the FBX 6.1. I've played with this and learned the export method to Space Engineers using an older version of Blender that didn't even have this choice, so I was just testing that out and chose the wrong one in the first place. So right now I know which one, and it is ASCII. Now only the selected objects, as we don't want the camera or the lamp or anything else in the scene to be exported with this, and set the scale to 100, which is matching the preferences in the XML file I will show you later. It sets the scale to 0.01, so we need to give it a multiplier of 100 to fit the cube grid again, but that will make sense later when you see the XML file. And just select the mesh, we don't need anything else. If you've set up modifiers, apply them here, so you don't need to worry about that. We don't need animations, and we can batch down as we don't have any further models, so that option won't change anything. And you can just hit export. So that's it for the steps you need to take in Blender. And now we can go over to setting up the textures and then compiling the whole thing with WMW Builder. So, after you've exported your model to FBX format, you're now ready to go to Gimp and export your diffuse texture to the DDS format. Once you're happy with the diffuse texture, you want to save it as, for example, Targa or PNG, and then reload it into Gimp. You could also just take the XCF file with the original layering, but make sure that you merge all the layers before you export. Once you've done that, you can just go to File, Export As, and select the folder you also saved your FBX file in. Give the name, the texture a name. I will just call it texture. Then go _DE dot DDS. So the DE stands for diffuse emissive. I will show you in a minute what that means. Now you can just export that, go to compression, select BC3 DXT5, and generate mipmaps. Mipmaps are used for LOD systems, so the further away the character is, the lower the quality of the texture needs to be, and DDS format automatically saves those low-res versions of the texture. Then you hit OK, and it generates the DDS file with the correct mipmaps for you. Now, diffuse stands for what you can see here, and emissivity, or emission, I think it's called, stands for this alpha amount in the texture. So if we wanted to make this logo here emissive, we would need to reload the XCF file and make this logo transparent with the transparent background, and it would show up emissive in the game engine. The same thing applies to the normal map. The only difference is that the alpha channel of the normal map holds the information for the specular intensity. So how do you add a specular map to the alpha channel of this normal map? That's rather easy. You will create your specular map, which has to be black and white, or let's say which has to be white and gray. You should never use a value of black because that will eliminate the color information of the normal map. Then you will just scatter around your specular map, whatever you want to create, scratches. There are plenty of tutorials on that, and later on I will create a tutorial on that as well. Then you hit Ctrl X to cut that out. Go to your diffuse channel, click Add Layer Mask and White Full Opacity. Then you hit Ctrl V to paste it, and hit the anchor at the bottom right of the Layer tab. Now you've added the specular map to the alpha channel of this normal map. This might look weird right now, but once it's in the engine, it will work. It's similar to Unity, which I will also create a tutorial on. But since we don't need a specular map for our little simple diffuse dummy texture, I will just export this dummy normal map. Even if you have no normal map, you should create a dummy one for the engine to find, or else the blocks will appear white as if they haven't found any textures. Now you go to Export As again, hit Texture _N for normal map and As for specularity, export, and the same settings apply, BC3 DXT5, and generate mipmaps. So that's it for saving the normal and the diffuse map in DDS format. So after we've now exported the models and the textures, there's only one last piece missing, which is an icon that shows up in the graphical user interface for us to select our model. I put this step at the end because I want to introduce the folder the Space Engineers models are placed in, as the textures are placed there as well, and we will need this folder for the second half of this tutorial. So you will find all the stuff we will need right now in Steam, the Steam install location, Steam Apps, Common, Space Engineers. Now, the first thing we want to do is find the textures for the GUI to have the correct file size. We will go to Content, Textures, GUI, Icons, and Cubes. Now we can just open one of these with Gimp. And we can delete all of these layers and just create a new one. It's just for the files, for the size of this thing. And I will just mark it with a colored dot, so it's easier to recognize for us later when we try to find it. So I will export that as, and in the same folder, Textures, GUI, Icons, Cubes, I'll call that Blender Cube.dds. Compression, as always, BC3DXT5 and generate bitmaps. So, after we've created all the necessary files, it's time for us to import our model into the game world. For that purpose, we will go to Space Engineers folder and click on Tools. Inside the Tools folder, you will find the MWM Builder together with all the corresponding DLL files. Now, we just need to copy the cube.fbx into this folder and create a new file. Right-click New, just a normal text editor file. Name it cube.xml. Now this XML will contain all the necessary information about the material and the textures for the cube.fbx to be compiled into an MWM file. Where do we get these informations about the XML file? Well, they are posted here on the official site of Space Engineers in the Advanced 3D Models Guide. I will link that in the description and put that into the annotations. Now we will just copy this section under the base XML file into our newly created XML file. Oh, should open that obviously with the editor, as XML files are usually used for the web. So we'll just paste that and now adjust that to our needs. Now, the material name is the part where I reminded you of adding and applying a texture. So this is where it becomes important now. So open up the cube.fbx with editor as well. Click at the beginning of the file and hit Ctrl F to search for material : double colon, and hit enter. Now you will find the material we named plus the texture we added. Without that texture, the model would be black inside the game world. So now we can just copy that and paste it into the material name of the XML file. The next step is to set the file path for the textures. We haven't copied the textures into the files, into the folders of the game itself, but we can already set the correct names. So in our case, it would be texture_DDS, and I will set the same parameter here for the normal texture. So I will just close that bracket, end the parameter with the texture path, and name it normal. Oh no, sorry, texture_ns.dds, which stands for the normal specularity map. Now, for the model name, you don't need to change anything. It can stay at default. The most important steps are the matte diffuse, the texture, and the normal texture. Oh, I mistyped here. Texture and normal texture. Alright, so we can save that. Now we should obviously put the textures into the file we've just addressed. Let me recheck. That was models, cubes, textures. No, textures, models, cubes. So you go to Common, Space Engineers, Content, Textures, Models, Cubes, and paste our newly created textures in here. Now we obviously need to create the model that can be imported. Go back to the Tools folder, and if you've created the XML file and the FBX file, you can just run the MWM Builder, and it will give you this MWM file. Now we can just paste that into the Models section of Space Engineers. So we go back to Space Engineers, Content, Models, Cubes. And you can now sort it into large or small, but for the purpose of this tutorial, I will just paste it here. Now for the final step, we need to tell the interface of Space Engineers that our model exists, so we can access that. For that purpose, we go back to Content, and now to the Data path, and we click on CubeBlocks.sbc. Now this CubeBlocks.sbc was already modified by me, so ignore all of this. I already added some models in here. What do we add inside this file. You can find the necessary information in the forum of Space Engineers. Again, I will link that in the description and as an annotation. We will use this definition right here and copy it, put it under the CubeBlocks tag. Now this definition defines what is necessary to build our block and where it's placed, etc., etc. So we will first of all not change the type ID. It doesn't matter, I don't really know what it does, but it's a cube block, so we can stick with that. But we will rename it, so the subtype ID is the official name, so to say. And I will just call that Blender block, as we've created sort of a Blender block. And the display name is the name that gets displayed in the toolbar, so I will name that Blender block as well, so I will easily refine that. Now we need to set the icon, which we've created earlier. So we go back to the content, textures, GUI, icons, cubes, and take a look at what we named that, and it was Blender Cube as well. So we can just stick with that. Cubes, Blender Cube. Now the cube size will stick to large, as we created a large block, and this size also can also stay at 111. This is the dimension of the cube that will act as the collision model. So if you create something like a bench that is 2 cubes wide, you need to change the right value to get the width of 2. Now you can just play with that, and I do think these are the length axis and this is the height axis, but I won't, don't count on that, just test it out if you create bigger models. Now we need to set the correct models, and we save that under models, cubes, cube. So we check if that is correct, always double check, because when I test this out, I oftentimes encountered a lot of errors because of naming the folders wrong, and you can prevent that by rechecking this stuff. Now this defines the components that are necessary to build our cube, which we don't need right now, as we will just place that in creative mode. Another thing you need to change is the block pair name, because it may not be the same as any other block that exists in here. At least it didn't work for me then. So we'll just call that Blender blocks. So this should be it. We've set the textures in the XML file. We've set the icon in here. And we've set the model, which should be accessed to. Now we need to set the position the icon is in. You can find that down here, a bit lower. Just copy this line here with the block position and go to the end of the CubeBlocks.sbc file, and you will find a lot of those. And just right after the last one, you can enter this new one. You need to give it the name you just typed under sub ID, or subtype ID, Blender block, and mind the capitalization, so you can just take the same. And now this has been fixed in a newer version, because this forum entry is very old. You can just enter any higher number in here, for example 1410. It will not sort into the slot that you assign it to, but rather to any next slot that is free. And after you save this now, we can start Space Engineers and hopefully see our block in game. So after we've now exported everything, it's time to check whether it worked or not. We can go into the toolbar and see our icon is already added to the menu. Let me just drag that in here and create a new station. And as you can see, our cube was added. The texture seems fine, as well as the scale. So this seems to have worked. As I've already told you, this is a size of 2.5 by 2.5 by 2.5, because this belongs to stations. If you want to create cubes for small spaceships, you should use the size of 0.5. Alright, so that's it for this tutorial. I hope it was at least a little bit helpful to you. I know it became rather long, but I wanted to be quite detailed about the steps. So if you encounter any errors, you can still comment under this video. I will always try to respond to your comments and solve issues together with you. Keep in mind that the game is in alpha still, so a lot of things might change and maybe this video becomes outdated in about a month or whatever. But I will try to keep it up to date and maybe create a new version with necessary changes. So then, thanks for watching. I hope you will have some fun creating your assets.